been introduced to Mark and Dennis. Mark is newly the regional administrator for the 12 county area of Butte, Bozeman, Helena, and the surrounding counties. And prior to becoming the regional administrator, Mark headed up the centralized intake, which is the hotline where all the child abuse calls go. And before that, you were in Great Falls, weren't you?
I was actually rural supervisor out of Region 2. So I covered Ponderay, Glacier, Toole, and Teton counties as a rural supervisor. And before that, I was a field worker in Great Falls. Back then, they call it the intervention or the ongoing unit. And then I was with Great Falls when we shifted to the one worker, one case as a worker.
All right, okay. And Dennis has been, how long have you been? You've been around a long time.
Not as long as he made it sound. It'll be 9 years in December.
Really? Oh,
Feels like a long time though.
yeah. But you were a clinician prior to your work in Child Protective Services.
Yeah, back east I was a in-home therapist for similar kids that I'm working with now. Only in their home, working with them and their families for a long time. Yeah.
Good. Well, we appreciate having you here. I guess you know what you're supposed to talk about.
If not, we'll tell you.
No, we really try to acquaint you with the workings of Child Protective Services. These guys are the people that we deal with more than anybody else. And their office is kind of where everything runs through it. And the meetings that you'll go to, 90% of them will be at Child Protective Services. And we've had a really, I think a real strong relationship between CASA and CPS, and we hope to maintain that. And so with that, I'll let you guys take it whatever direction.
Yeah, I think our relationship, and before we maybe start a little bit, our relationship is probably one of the stronger ones, I think, from some of the areas that we have in the state. We really get along well with our CASAs here. I guess one of the reasons I wanted to be here tonight with Mark, I also serve on the local board for CASA. So I'd like to thank you for being a part of CASA now and coming on board and working with our kids. We need people to really help us at this stage. And so that was another reason I wanted to come.
Okay, if we could take a spin around the table.
Julie.
Charlene. Carol Gibson. Margaret. Linda.
Katie.
Donna.
Alan.
Brianna.
Susan.
Cindy.
You got the wrong room, Alan. You kind of have an idea of how we feel at work, because there's 4 of us now. 4 males in our whole office. All the rest of the staff are female. Well, yeah, it's interesting, the dynamics with some of that, and I wish I had more male workers, because there's a certain piece that it just works better for certain families and certain kids to have that. Unfortunately, we don't have enough of that, but we definitely then try to utilize males as much as we can in certain situations.
And
I
think
never
so.
noticed that you. Well,
Yeah,
there was
I didn't
another
notice
male
that.
here last night.
Yeah, he's had some things.
Did you
pop
scare
up.
him off already?
Yeah, and I'll echo what Dennis said. Like I said, when I was a rural supervisor, they tried to start a CASA up there for a bit, and then there wasn't one for a long time. And attorneys, to the best of their ability, they're attorneys. No offense to my division administrator, Sarah Corbett, who was not only the Cascade County attorney, but then became Child Protection Unit attorney. She, and if I don't know if any of you have had the pleasure of meeting with her or speaking with her, she is a very passionate and very knowledgeable young lady as far as the concepts and things of social work and the history and the law. That's what she didn't become an attorney, just, you know, corporate law or whatever. That's where she came from. And so if you ever have a chance to hear her, I heard her once at one of our conferences, one of the camp conferences, doing the session. And she took you all the way back, kind of what Bill was saying, to those early days and where child law came from, now child welfare. And if you ever get a chance to hear her do that, I'd say take her up on it, because she is a wealth of knowledge, and we are really good as a division to have her as our head of our division.
What was her name again, please?
Sarah Corbally.
Okay, thank you.
So she is division administrator, and right now we have Corey Costello, who's a field services administrator. She used to be the regional administrator in Region 2, and what that position is it oversees all of the 5 regions. So I report to Corey, Corey reports to Sarah. That's kind of how that goes. And so that was a position that had been with the department, I think, before, and then it kind of went away as they realigned. And then they looked at how flat the organization was, and our director, Anna Whiting Sorrell, looked at the amount of supervision and the amount of workers to supervisor ratio, and the way things were. And she did testify at the last legislative hearing. I was there for that, when they kind of challenged her on whether that was a good move, a good place for someone to be, and it definitely is. You know, especially when your leadership comes from the ground up or has had the experience that Corey's had. So, but again, thank you very much for doing what you're doing. You are truly appreciated, and as Bill was saying, you're the voice of, you're the voice for a child, and I think that's one of the things that gets lost in the legal system. No insult or put down for any of the attorneys. People do try, but when you're not there, when you're not making that contact with that child, that 7-year-old boy that's in foster care for the first time in his life, that's a little different. For an attorney, the guy in the suit or the young lady in the suit or whatever, to talk to him or see him in court, or maybe see him for the first time in court and they've been in care for 3 weeks, versus y'all. So, thanks a lot. I guess the only time that I have actually spoken in different groups before and everything, I've kind of taken it very openly. So it's kind of stop where you want to and fire off what you want to, because I know people hold the questions to the end, and people are jotting down what they want, and they want to so if you got a question, feel free to launch one off at us. If you heard something, feel free to ask. If you heard a rumor, feel free to ask. We kind of want to be an open book, and what do we say, transparency in government. So but as far as Child Family Services Division, let me expound a little bit upon a change that's occurring. And this is not a change that we came upon. It isn't like some people think, you go down the cereal aisle and you pick off a box of whatever because it looks like the best color or the most tasty or whatever. We are going into the SAMS model, and you'll hear that lingo, the SAMS model. It's the Safety Assessment Management System. And we kind of got into this, we had the CFSR, which is the Child Family Services. It was a federal review that occurred in 2008. And out of that federal review, some of the things that came out of it were contacts with the non-custodial parent that were kind of lacking. And other things that came out of it were things like your initial response and safety and everything was good, but the overall assessing of the family. And so there's a program out there that had been out there for a while, and other states have taken hold of it. And it has been gaining momentum over, I think, Sarah said something like 30-something years. But basically what it is when we took a report in centralized intake, we sent it out to Dennis, would pick it up as a supervisor, I'd pick it up when I was in the field, and it would say incident report. Okay, so right there is where your focus is. Incident report, what's the incident, what happened to this kid? Okay, so that is kind of where we kind of go away from, because a worker would go out and they'd say, oh, a dirty house, and some workers would be like, hello, yeah, I have a report on you, you have a dirty house, I'll be over in a couple days, hope it's clean.
Of course it's very clean.
Imagine that. That was the solution, kind of threatening a little finger wag. And what are we assessing? Why is the house continually dirty? Do these just, unfortunately, maybe dirty people that live that way, and that's the way they are, but they're not hurting the kids. The kids are growing up fine and going to school. They stink. Teachers complain, but they are learning. They're passing. And so maybe it's just a hygiene issue. And, you're running into a lot of that. But maybe it's maybe it's a symptom of a very serious underlying problem. And so the approach that they went through, like I said, when the CFSR came along, they did a federal review. And out of that comes this thing called the Performance Improvement Plan. And the Performance Improvement Plan, which is a PIP, was put together by a group of people for performance improvement, which is a PIG, Performance Improvement Group. So the PIG, yep, typical. I thought I'd get out of this when I left the military, but no such luck, no such luck. So they put together a group of people, and the PIG group came up with a plan that you send back up to the Fed. And basically what it is, there's federal dollars tied to social worker salaries, tied to what we do. And there are penalties when, the Fed decides that you're not doing quite what the Fed wants to do. And Montana is one of those states that kind of tends to, when the Fed does that, because that's why we had the conservation ticket for speeding, but that's a totally other story. Anyway, so the federal government comes out and they do this review. And out of that, we start making these connections with other agencies and National Resource Center. And they look at how are we handling this? What are we doing? Well, what we're doing is we're going out, and Bill was talking about, whack on the rear, and there's the bruise, and there's everything else. And we're going, yeah, there's the bruise, and we took the picture, and sure enough, this is what's going on. But did we assess what's the family? Is this kid in a state of danger? And that's kind of where this is going. So a lot of times you look at the incident, if the incident occurred, there must be abuse and neglect. Well, there are one-time incidents. There are parents who spank their kids once too hard, who leave a mark. There are parents who make mistakes, and they're not on your radar before, and they are not on your radar since. So looking at this holistically, we looked at a process, and we came up with signing on with this. And we were a little bit resistant at first, because when you first look at it, it's pretty intense. Because you've got 6 areas. First area you have is the incident itself. But we're not going to be incident focused anymore, because the report used to come out of CI, and it used to say, this is the incident, this is what happened, and Dennis would send a worker out there to see, yes, the kid has a bruise, or no, he doesn't. And sometimes when you do that, you hone in on just that, and you're missing all this, all the stuff on the periphery. So when we look at the SAMS model, and like I said, we were resistant to it because we have those 6 areas. And the areas are, like I said, there's the extent of the maltreatment. What happened to the child? Okay? How serious is the injury? And then there's the circumstances surrounding the maltreatment. In what situation was this child in when this occurred? Okay? And then there's the child functioning. How does this child function on a day-to-day basis? We used to put in the report child vulnerability, and Dennis could tell you. We'd always say, what was the first thing there was in child vulnerability? What's the first thing CI would type in there? Age of the child.
Yeah.
This child is vulnerable because they're 3. Really? And we did, because that's the focus. Yes, a 3-year-old has a greater extent of vulnerability than a 13-year-old. We can all agree to that. But is that why this child is vulnerable? How about the 13-year-old that when the teacher calls in and reports on this kid and says that he has a bruise, and you start talking to the teacher about child functioning and say, well, how is this kid in school? You get that little side, well, a man, he pushes the buttons, he's been in the principal's office half a dozen times, he does this. Now we're getting a picture. Okay, why did this single mom lose it with this 13-year-old boy? Okay, and why does this kid have a bruise? Part of child functioning. So now we're looking at, he got the bruise, that's the extent of the maltreatment. He got it when mom was really mad and came home from work and everything, she's just saying, so he got some circumstances surrounding maltreatment. And his functioning is, he's a button pusher, he's got some serious problems, maybe he's got some oppositional defiant disorder, maybe he's got, that ADHD, maybe he's on some sort of drugs, maybe he's seeing a therapist. There are issues here. Okay, and then you got 3 other areas. Those 3 other areas deal with the caretaker, the caregiver. Okay, so you've got the adult functioning. It's how does mom function in life? What is mom doing? Is mom a functioning alcoholic? Is mom, does she work? Does she not work? What is mom like, to the best that people would know? And then you've got general parenting. How does mom parent? Mom never talks to the kid until the kid gets in trouble. Okay, and then you've got discipline. How does mom discipline? Mom doesn't until the kid gets in trouble, and then whack. Okay.
We also look at dads.
Mm-hmm. We do.
Wondering.
Yeah.
We do look at dads too.
Yep.
It's just the primary number of our calls and call outs are female oriented, and a lot of times we don't necessarily know or have a dad or we got a lot of dads, and we gotta kind of figure that out as far as the family functioning as well.
The first thing that jumps out at me is that, following this SAM's model, looks like it must take about 10 times the amount of time per case at a minimum of what you were doing previously
Now
to
you
get
see why
even
we-
close.
Now you see why we were resistant.
I would agree with you.
Yeah.
And when I first looked at it, I'm like, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I could wrap something up in half the time. Well, what am I wrapping up?
Oh, yeah, I'm not saying it's
Yeah.
wrong, I'm just
Yeah.
saying that given an agency that we've been told perennially is overloaded, it looks like the overload just went into overdrive.
You would be correct in that assumption, in what it looks like, in the perception of how that's going. And we are doing a lot of work with our staff. There's a family functioning assessment training. It's been piloted in several different offices. Butte is the office that piloted it here. I would love to have had Rhonda or Jen here because they've been doing it they're the supervisors in Butte. They've been doing it for quite a while now, and the process does get you where you need to go faster when you realize what you're looking at. Initially, yeah, I've looked at it, and I think we all did the same thing. We kind of had that step back and went, really? But it's a good process, and it does. The one thing it's definitely going to address is the danger factor, because we as an agency, when you heard Bill talk about child welfare and where things start, we as an agency have to define our clientele. We have to define our customer, and a lot of times I got lost. Who are we out to serve? We're out to serve the families, or we out to serve we're out to serve unsafe kids. As an agency, we're supposed to be there for the unsafe kids. And so we have to look at a way to define that, and the SAMS process is kind of that way. It's like risk. You're all at risk here. I mean, this place has stood for hundreds of years. It could slide down this hill any minute. You know, the earth could shift. We're in an earthquake area. There's risk. But on the spectrum, on the scale, where is that put you? Okay, it's probably fairly low risk. Okay, so your impending danger is fairly low. But as you get further down this edge, you have a thing called impending danger and you have present danger. Well, when a child is unsafe, there are usually several conditions that occur, and one of them is an out-of-control situation. Okay, something is not, nobody has the ability to control. No one is there providing any protective capacities. Okay, so you're looking at this in the spectrum, the long haul, to figure out where are you at when you got the call. And that's what CI does. They've gone through this process, and it's even difficult for them because you're asking different questions. So you as mandated reporters, if you happen to call in a report, you're going to start getting asked a bunch of those different questions. And you're going to go, what? Well, I don't know anything about how mom gets looks. That's fine. We're still going to ask you, and we're going to put that down. But there is the area of risk. Okay, we're all under it. And then as you move along that spectrum, it's the area to intervene at. So there's several things that you look at that are called the safety threshold. Just like he was talking about that minimum standard, there's a safety threshold. And when certain things meet that safety threshold, then what you have is impending or present danger. So let me give you a classic example. Somebody calls us and says, we have a child out here in the middle of the road. Okay. Well, where's this road? You know, it's the typical thing you'd ask. Where's the road? How busy is the street and everything? What does it matter? If they tell you that the child is in the middle of the road, and it's the middle of downtown Helena somewhere, or it's the middle of I-15, or it's the risk factor is greater on some roads of getting hit than it is on others. But the danger is still there. And the fact that you would say, well, okay, it's a lesser response or a lesser priority if the kid's in the residential section. No. Somebody has to address safety. Someone needs to go, hello, yes, is there anyone there? No, there isn't. Well, could you go and get the child out of the road, please? Somebody has to address safety, which requires an immediate response. And so we have to look at that. And you get sidetracked going, well, how busy is the road? Is there No, get the kid out of the road. That's a safety issue. And so that's where your impending and your present danger and stuff comes in. So where you're looking to address unsafe kids. And that's part of the SAMS process. That's kind of the way the focus is run. And Dennis is going to get immersed in it here real soon. He is. There is, I'm sure we've already gone over, I kind of touched on it here a second ago, but mandated reporting, everyone's familiar with mandated reporting and mandated reporting law, or, okay. All right, let me kind of go down that avenue. Mandated reporters are different than a regular person on the road. Mandated reporters are people who have a duty to report, and this is statutory. Statutory? Statute? Whatever the word is, thank you. This is, in statute that it's mandated to report. And in the administrative rules, okay, so you've got Montana Code Annotated, which is your statutes. Then you've got the administrative rules of Montana, which is about a grade below the statutes. In the administrative rules of Montana, it directs that people are to report through centralized intake. Now, why is that? Well, that's because centralized intake was established to determine, and I even saw something in a paper a while back saying, well, we should treat things a little bit differently. Maybe we're going to treat our response differently in Malta than we will in Missoula, as far as working with the families and some of those other things, because I was a rural supervisor, I know how that goes. But the initial reason to get involved should be the same. Families have the right to parent. One of the questions we ask people that apply for the job is, what do you believe is the right to parent, and when does the state have the right to get involved? Because if you're in this job, you have to understand that people have a right to raise their kids. And they have a right to raise their kids the way they see fit. And until the welfare or the health of the child is endangered, till that risk starts moving down that spectrum and it starts peaking to some impending or some very present danger situations, then we shouldn't be knocking on your door and asking you questions. Okay? So if we look at that, a mandated reporter is required to report by statute. And it doesn't mean, and in fact there has been a change a little bit to the reporting law. Not the mandated portion. You're required to report. And if you don't, and it's found that you don't, the county attorney of that state can prosecute you for a misdemeanor. So it does have a law, and it does have a fight to it.
I have to ask,
Sure.
are we the mandated reporter?
You are now.
You are.
Oh, okay. Got it.
You are now. There's a whole list. Teachers, some clergy, doctors,
Healthcare,
police
yeah.
officers, healthcare providers.
Daycare providers.
Yep.
Are we mandated reporters in the cases to which we're assigned, or are we generally
Mandated reporters.
for any?
Yeah, it's like us. We're
Okay.
CPS, but if we see some police officer sees abuse and neglect, you should call it in. So
Oh, okay.
Even if it's not our case.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay.
Well, is a person who suspects trouble in the house next door a mandated reporter? No.
just people who are kind of in the profession, or people who associate with like school staff, even your custodians, your engineers and everything are fall under that category, mandated reporters. And a mandated reporter is required to report firsthand. I mean, we've had some problems where the principal says, bring the report to me, I'll call it. No, that kind of waters it down. We want to hear it from the person who has it. So you're required as a mandated reporter to report abuse and neglect. Okay, and that's what CI is for. You're going to report it to them. And it's going to be called in, and like I said, that's Montana Code Annotated, and then the administrative rules of Montana does specify that people who want to report, even if they report to the local office or anything, will be directed to centralized intake. Because we want to do the best job of assessing that report so that no matter who it goes out to, we know that we've met statute. Statute says reasonable cause to suspect, which means I have reasonable belief to suspect that abuse has occurred or is occurring, or there's risk of abuse, which is where our physical neglect fits in. That's risk of, abuse, physical abuse, or psychological abuse. So you're required as a mandated reporter to report. You make that report. It goes down from there. CI looks at it, triages it. They might put it in. It may not rise to the level of abuse and neglect by statute, but they're going to put it in an informational report. He's still going to see that. That's a set of eyes. And when he sees that in the field, he may go, wait a minute. I know that. I know some more about this and everything. And he may go to the RA, which is me now, and say, hey, this is what's going on, I think we should investigate, so we put together our heads and everything, and we changed the report from informational to CPS, which is investigative. So we have several different categories of reports. We have CPS, which is the one we're gonna go out and check, and that falls under priorities. There's a priority 1 response, which is within 24 hours, somebody's gonna be out there looking at the job. There's a priority 2, which is 72 hours, and there's a priority 3, which is about a 10-day window. So it's 10 calendar days, no exclusions for weekends. There's also priority 9, which is anonymous, but that's probably nothing you need to worry about. And then you have a CPI, which is informational reports. So the neighbor next door that keeps hearing this and then calls in and says, I hear this yelling and screaming. Well, did you call the law enforcement or anything? Didn't sound too serious, and so they type in a little CPI. Then somebody else calls in who's on the other side of the street, or whatever, and says, I've seen this, this is going on and everything. And then we start seeing all this going in one area.
Who
And so that-
sees it?
centralized
Who
intake.
correlates that?
Well, centralized intake in the field. If Dennis had 3 CPIs on the same family, you know, he'd probably start going,
And we would look to kick potentially then one of those up to a CPS, so we can go out and start
Oh,
to really look at what's going on.
So you make a report as a mandated reporter, and it goes out there, and then there's what's called a CFS, which is a request for services. These can't be made by the neighbor or by grandma for her daughter or something like that, unless the daughter's like there and knows she's calling in. So it would be taken, if grandma calls in about something that her daughter's having a problem with the grandchild or whatever, and then we can say, well, would she like, if it doesn't rise to abuse and neglect, actually, we're gonna kick it out if it does, but if it doesn't, then you're going to look at that and you're gonna say, okay, this is a report request for services, and you're going to say, the only people that can do that technically is the caregiver. Now, I've had people call in, social workers, yourselves, and other folks call in because the family knows they're calling. I've already checked with mom and she would like this, and so you call in a request for services. That's also something we respond to. We try and talk to people about what's going on, hooking them up with community resources and things like that. So those are your basic 3 categories of reports. So those are kind of where it goes, but most of the ones that you're gonna get involved in naturally are gonna be that CPS report, where we went out and we found there was present danger. We put in a present danger plan, and a lot of times that present danger plan is calling to remove your child from home. You know, your child, we put the child with grandma, but we can't leave the child here because of what's going on. Because maybe the perpetrator, you know, mom's not willing, dad's not willing, somebody's not willing to do what they need to do to keep that child safe. So then, after that point in time, we continue to do the family functioning assessment. We call it the investigative safety assessment now, but it's going to be changed over to family functioning assessment, where we look at the entire picture. And in doing that, the worker is supposed to be backstaffing with their supervisor. Okay, so Dennis has a large amount of reports on his radar, and a very small amount of workers right now. We have picked it up a tick. We've been managed to hire, so we have some good staff we brought in.
We're averaging right now, and have for about the last 2 months, well, 3 months now, September's over, an average of 5 to 7 new calls a day. Which then we have to weed out and decide, okay, you know, based on the codes that you just got, where do we have to prioritize, where do we have to get out first, how can we make sure we keep the kids safe that are in these situations. Supervisors wind up taking a lot of the CFSs for services and making phone calls and trying to help the staff so that they don't have to deal with those issues. But there's been days that, you know, 7 calls have come in and 6 of those have been P1s where you gotta be out within 24 hours. Myself and the other supervisor are out doing P1 calls along with the rest of our staff because that's who there is. So that becomes all of our priority at that point, is to go out and make sure that kids are safe.
So is this staff shortage the result of money or turnover and, is it
Sure.
just a budget thing or is it?
No,
Okay.
it's turnover, it's normal burnout,
Uh-huh.
stress is high. When it just seems to be, this is about the second major time since I've been in the group that we've had this. There was another time when I had started and I was a field worker that we had 3 field worker staff in the ongoing unit to cover about 100 kids. So it can get real stressful for people.
Now, they did cut us, the last legislative session
Yeah.
did cut us. They cut us by, I think, 10.5 FTE, which is full-time employees. So those are gone, those are positions we're not allowed to have.
Were they full going in?
No, well, as we knew it was coming, we just didn't fill it. So,
And studies that we've done, gosh, for the last at least 10 years, have always come back and said that we're probably close to about 100 people short in the field.
and if you think it's rough for us, check out a reservation.
Right.
There's,
Yeah.
I talked to Paul Cathlicking, and he and I worked together with him up in Glacier Browning. Not unusual to get 1,500 reports in a month. You know, and because it's a reporting process and trying to get out to all those and triaging who you're gonna look at, who you're not. So, you know, it is difficult, and that puts it mildly, I guess.
Well, and you won't really get to know all the reports and kids that we get, because we initially try to start doing a voluntary agreement with families if we can, leave the kids in the home if they're not really in immediate danger, work with the families, get services in there, and we try to do that piece if we can. Well, we don't file on those families then right away. Well, if we don't file on them, you don't get assigned to them as a case. So there's a whole, we only, in our region, we've only really filed last year probably on about 4%. So it's really pretty low, and we had over 600. Okay, so the numbers and who you really get to see are really those cases that we've already tried some initial stuff, it didn't work, we were forced to take the child out of the home and really try to work more intensively now with them. And there was a significant safety issue for that child. That's when you get assigned through the courts.
Can I ask you, with voluntary service agreements,
Just what I was
there
going-
was some rumor going around that those are not going to be used as much as in the past based upon
The
some
new
of the
SAM
stuff that
system?
was happening, what was happening in Great Falls with
Oh.
Is there any truth to that, Mark?
I think what it's going to be looked at is it's going to be looked at differently, but I was trying to hunt it down. I've got it pinned out here in statute because, of course, I got a lot of stuff highlighted in statute, just a matter of locating it. Because voluntary service agreements, what we need to do is, you need to look at the safety aspect. And so if you can do a voluntary service agreement with a family and assuring a child is safe by doing that, then you can do, you know, the VSA. But there are some things that you end up going right to filing. I'm not sure, I don't know the case in Great Falls. I know of the report actually because I was in centralized intake when it occurred. And so I'm not gonna speculate on what did or didn't occur. But a voluntary safety agreement is something that you'd like to start at, but it's not mandated that we start there. And so for a lot of workers, when we train, we have to say, you could look at this as a tool in your toolbox if you want to work voluntarily with a family, but you have to deal, and that's where the SAMS model puts some more effort into it. The statute was pretty clear, and I'll hunt it down here in a second, but if a child can be safely kept in the home, or if a child has to be out of the home, you have 30 days to figure out how to safely return the child, and safely is statute. That's what they use. So the SAMS model really addresses safety in a bigger pattern, and it gives you a more global concept of what that means as you apply it to a family. So if you're gonna start, if Dennis is looking at it, a worker says, well, they're willing to work voluntarily, he may look at it and say, well, they might be willing, but you're not gonna fix this in 30 days, and the kid's at grandma's house, you need to file. Okay? They might be very willing to work with us voluntarily. We'd love to work but the bottom line is safety. So if you cannot come up with a plan, a present danger plan, which is in the SAMS term, we used to call it a safety plan, but a present danger plan addresses present danger. What do we need to do to make this safe? And once you get that done, and if you can do that with a family and are willing to work voluntarily, you know, they come on and they work with you, then there may not be a need to file. But as to your question, I see it changing, and I see us looking at it in a whole new light as far as what does this really mean? Because the statute's pretty darn clear when it says safely. The child can be safe and return home.
And you mentioned 30 days, is that built in?
That's statute, yes.
Okay.
So if we remove a child, and the parent agrees, which, this is me, this is Mark talking here, maybe not as a representative and everything, but think about standing on the other side of the door. And I knock, and I say, hi, I'm Mark, I'm with Child Family Service Division, this, that, and everything. I just heard what's going on, and I tell you, well, we can't, you know, this is just horrific. I mean, your child is a toddler, they're crawling on the floor, and you got wires hanging out here, you got this, this child can't stay here. Where do you want to put your child for the night? Or I can put him in foster care, I mean, I could put him in it, but where do you, I'm gonna call my mom and have it. What part of that was voluntary? Where you want to put your child was voluntary. I made it very clear up front, they're not staying here. So to me, The word voluntary, because other states call it court or non-court. If they don't have enough to go to court, they'll try and work with a family in a non-court situation, otherwise they're going to court. Here, to me, if I'm receiving those words, there ain't so much voluntary. My kid's leaving my house now. I get to maybe decide where my kid's gonna go, but they're not staying here. Not even, no matter what deal I make, they're not staying here, and I've done that. I went to a house and the lady had candles and clothes and hijacked electricity from the house next door and ran a big double 1400 extension cords connected together through the window and everything. And I went in there, oh my gosh, what a fire hazard. I said, where do you want your kids to go? Because they're not staying here. Oh, we're fine. And they were older kids. They're like 6, 7 years old. No, and this, I said, ma'am, any one of these candles tips over and this place is going up. It's an old home. You got no electricity. Well, Jack is that it's running to the refrigerator. Well, we don't want to use that. We unplug it and plug it in the microwave. No, ma'am. When you're stealing electricity from the house next door, I'm sure sooner or later they're going to do something about that. And no, your kids can't stay. And she couldn't get it. It's like, no. I said, ma'am, I'm going to end up placing your children. So there's nothing voluntary about it. When you're receiving that, we're the department, it's like, it's not very voluntary. So I'm a little bit, I guess I twitch a little bit when you say voluntary, because part of that isn't really voluntary. What's voluntary is the placement. Voluntarily working with us means non-court. And I think we as an agency need to wrap ourselves around that a little bit better.
I mean, certain things will automatically trigger probably us taking the child out of the home right away. I mean, if our call comes in that there's suspected chemical dependency issues and drug use and things like that, and we know then that either paraphernalia has been found or indeed drugs have been found there or whatever, those kids are coming out of there because that's not going to be resolved in a day, a week, a
So
month.
you have the authority to
Oh, yeah.
absolutely take those kids out that
We
minute.
did.
Yep.
The department shall respond to emergency reports of known or suspected child abuse, doesn't matter, it's in 41-3-302, or neglect 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That means workers are on call, that means when they can't find the worker, they're calling Dennis. Seriously, and he leaves his house at 0:30 in the morning, and goes out there and deals with it. So,